Well, welcome again to Driven 2020, day 4. This is 5 days of some of our best minds in automation talking about the 5 key themes that we see in the automation market: artificial intelligence, robotic process automation, general process automation, application modernization, and enterprise user experience design. So whatever is required, right, we'll help you find a faster way to get your business outcome. I'm even wearing the t-shirt today, right? There is a faster way. Also, you might have noticed that the new Forrester Wave for digital process automation service providers Q3 2020 came out. I've been, really subtle about that, and so you might not have noticed. And if indeed that is the case, please check out our website. If you go to www.bp-3.com, you can easily find a link to the Forrester report and download that, register and download. When you choose to work with BP3, right, you're choosing to work with people who are the best at what we do, and we really appreciate the recognition, but also the opportunity to share our craft and our enjoyment of what we do with you, our clients. And let me just say thank you once again. So we're ready to start day 4, focused on application modernization. And what does that even mean? Well, it turns out we all have systems we've outgrown. We have new technologies and approaches that have opened up new opportunities to address those systems and those needs and changing processes and market conditions. So our team works with clients to address those mission critical applications with all kinds of technology, but also with process expertise. And without saying too much more, I think I should hand it over to David Bailey, who is hosting our session today. Really excited for it. David, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome, everybody. I think that grinder video was specifically for me. Stuart's been trying to get me to upgrade my coffee grinder for a few years now, which is quite annoying when he points out the $1,000 grinders that I should start with. Let me get on the first slide and share my screen with you guys. So like Scott said, I'm David Bailey. I'm the Director of Engineering Services at BP3. And today's driven topic is application modernization. So I'm going to be hosting you through the day. A quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, focusing on a variety of projects that BP3 has delivered that relate to application modernization. And application modernization can mean a lot of different things. So we've pulled together stories and examples that cover everything from RPA to IBM BPM to full stack development using the process lens that BP3 brings along. In a few minutes, I'm going to talk to you about a process that started out as RPA, but evolved into an intelligent automation application modernization example. Next, Joe Warner is going to tell you about a project that he's been working on with our team to modernize an IBM BPM solution. Then Rainer Rebeck will talk to us about modernizing a telecommunication company's construction application. Then Gordon Siegfried is going to demo Brazos portal, Brazos Task Manager, which is being used in multiple application modernization projects that BP3 is running to drive both task management of the process as well as provide insight and visibility into the progress of the jobs. Aaron Bretz is next, and he's going to cover microservices and tell us about how BP3 is helping Keller Williams orchestrate microservices using Camunda to drive process automation. And finally, Tracy Hires is going to talk to us about how BP3 helped modernize a cruise line reservation system. So what is application modernization? Well, Gartner defines it as the migration of legacy applications to new applications or platforms, including the integration of new functionality to provide the latest functions to the business. So it can include everything from replatforming, rehosting, recoding, re-architecting, re-engineering, interoperability, replacement, or retirement. So I think this is a good time for our first poll. What does application modernization mean to you? So while you guys are answering the poll, just want to cover a few of the technologies and concepts that you're going to see today. And looking at this list, I'm pretty sure if we threw blockchain on here, everyone could black out their bingo card, right? And the amazing thing, though, is that BP3 is using all of these things and even more in the solutions that you're going to hear about over the next 2 hours. We might not mention everything by name, But these are the kinds of technologies that are underpinning much of the application modernization work that BP3 is doing. So how are we doing with that poll, Krista?
So it looks pretty evenly spread across what people are using. I have a feeling lots of people are using lots of different combinations of this and have, or what they think the application modernization really needs. So
yeah, for sure. And it means a lot of things, like I said.
It's a big day.
All right, so what's BP3's approach to application modernization? Many application modernization projects start with existing data or the system of record as the foundation. BP3 starts with the business process and the customer journey that we're working to improve. Oftentimes, this means bringing in a process engine like Camunda to orchestrate the work and to provide a layer of visibility. And you're going to hear more details later today about how we did this at both Charter and at Keller Williams. One of the interesting side effects that we've seen in using process and decision notation as the basis for the applications is the business can not only visualize things like, oh, look, you know, on task C, we've got 30% of our work stuck there, but they can also more easily understand what the underlying code is doing by looking at the BPMN and DMN diagrams. And this results in better conversations and better communication with our clients about the application and actually how it works. They get a visual understanding of what's going on by looking at these diagrams. Design thinking is key to making the kind of improvements that are needed. This means working directly with the business and developing hypotheses around the solutions before they're built. We then build clickable prototypes to do user testing to validate our hypothesis with the end users of the application. This is how we make sure we're building the right solution, something that the business is excited about using. Tomorrow's Driven is all about user experience design, and I encourage you to join to hear more about how BP3 is leveraging design and design thinking across our projects. We also apply modern software engineering practices. This includes the technologies we listed earlier, but it's more than just technology. BP3's engineering services team are experienced software engineers and architects who are passionate about software development. Agile development is table stakes, but successful projects require more than just using Agile methodology. We work with each other and our clients using proven processes such as pair programming, code reviews, test-driven development. And we're experts with engineering tools like Jira and Rally. We're going to hold regular grooming sessions to make sure we know what we're going to work on in the next sprint and make sure we understand what's in the backlog. At BP3, we call these story time. One of my personal favorite meetings are our weekly team playbacks and retrospectives. So every Friday, our whole team gathers together and shares what we've developed and what we've learned across all the projects that we're working on with application modernization and engineering services. In our retrospective time, we discuss what's going well, what's not going well, and what changes we can make to improve our software processes. This also helps make sure we continue to practice the processes that we know result in better outcomes. And finally, iterative development is key. You have to release valuable code frequently to the business. You learn from that release and improve from there. Burning down and rebuilding is rarely the right answer to modernization. Modern applications, they need to be adaptable, flexible. They need to be able to adjust to this quickly changing world that we live in without having to start from scratch. So iterative improvement is key in that. As a reminder, if anyone has questions, please feel free to ask those in the Q&A section of the webinar or in our Slack channel. I know a bunch of our engineers and consultants are out monitoring the Slack channel, so they're happy to engage and answer any questions you might have over there. So I want to give you an example of an audit process that actually started out as an RPA project for BP3. But as we learned more about the process, we found that it was really beyond simple RPA. You could call it intelligent automation, but I kind of like to think of this as application modernization of an Excel-based process. I'm starting with this example because it highlights how BP3 pulls together a variety of resources to solve complex problems. In this example, you'll see how we use RPA, software engineering, machine learning, and containerization. And this is a pattern that you're going to see throughout all of the application modernization solutions we talk about today. A couple of things to note about this process. First, it's an audit process, which means there's a busy time nature to the work. Now, RPA is generally not a great tool to use when you have high speed and high volume requirements. But we started out using RPA for this process, and it was a great proof of concept. But we realized it wasn't going to scale to meet the business's goal of adding new clients and still meeting their audit window that they had. The next thing is BP3 supports this process in a managed services capacity. So we have an ongoing relationship with the client, so our dev team can make iterative improvements and adjust the process based on any yearly regulatory changes that come up. And we've done things like build in error handling. So when the application runs into an error, it automatically opens a support ticket with our team. And this is a great example of how we leverage our BP3 Labs team in supporting applications for our clients. Finally, we were able to deliver several versions of this process to the client, and we have a current backlog to expand this automation more. We deliver the value, we learn from that value, and we work with the business to assess the improvements and build new functionality into that next release. The businesses that we work with in this manner always see more value in these kinds of iterative relationships. So here's an overview of the process in a diagram. We've broken down the swim names here, the top one being the human tasks. And we're only dealing with a current team right now, one current team. And so the other lanes represent different systems or different technologies that are being used. So we've also broken this process down into different milestones across the top. There's a pre-processing section, a trial balance consolidation section, a quick user review, audit testing, and then the final review. So what I want to focus on is really the first part of this application. The audit team has to take in hundreds of individual spreadsheets and consolidate them into a single workbook so they can test the consolidated accounts against the regulations. In the spirit of iterative improvement, BP3 added the automation of formatting the trial balances in the second version of this app. In this case, it's a simple RPA tasks, but it saves the business over 6 hours of manual work per client. The other big change we made in version 2 of this process was moving the major Excel processing out of RPA and into Java. And now we did this for a couple of reasons. Due to the large number of individual spreadsheets we're dealing with, like I said, we've got hundreds of different spreadsheets that we're consolidating. We had some reliability issues with the first version that just used RPA. Now, we could have probably thrown bigger hardware to solve that part of the problem, but we were also seeing the overall process take longer to complete than the team wanted. So we were able to pull in our software engineering team, implement some simple Java app that runs in seconds as compared to what RPA was taking hours to complete before. The third area I want to highlight is the account classifier. So the account classifier service, what we're doing here is working with a set of financials from different LLCs that each have their own chart of accounts. And the problem that we ran into was that the account descriptions for each LLC's chart of accounts are different, but they have to map to a standard set of accounts for the consolidated financials. When the bot comes across an account that doesn't have a mapping that matches the consolidated list, we use a cognitive decision service, which uses a combination of rules-based inferencing, natural language processing, and a convolutional neural network to figure out how to map that new account. We packaged all of that into a Docker container, and then we're able to easily deploy that on each of the bot runners that orchestrates the process. This is another area where iterative development really paid off for us. In the first version of this, we had about 40% accuracy. Not as good as we wanted, not as good as our client wanted. But after analyzing the results from the initial quarterly run, we were able to adjust and retrain the algorithm so it achieved 90% accuracy. With a managed services relationship, we can now make incremental improvements after each quarterly run and increase the accuracy even more. All we have to do there is retrain with new data, test, and then deploy the new version of the account classifier service Docker container out to bot runners using a CICD pipeline. Now, the rest of this process is pretty straightforward RPA, but we do see opportunities to enhance this process, especially as we start to kind of zoom out and look at the broader process and the full customer journey that's happening. So while this might not be the traditional application modernization story that you were expecting to hear today, I really like the example because it illustrates the kind of work BP3 is uniquely positioned to do, pulling together a variety of technologies like RPA and Java development and AI to create meaningful business improvements. And you can see from this slide, we've saved the auditors over 49 hours per client by using this application. So really substantial savings. And we've also improved the accuracy. You know, we eliminated those mundane human tasks that are prone to error and let the bot handle that. So leveraging BP3's key tenets of more focus, more foresight, and more follow-up, we can easily pull together the expertise that's needed whether it's re-engineering a legacy application, adding a layer of process visibility into a data-driven state engine, or making Excel-based processes faster, more reliable, and more intelligent. So Joe Warner is up next to tell you about a project that he's working on to modernize an IBM BPM application.
And as Joe's getting ready to share and come off mute, we'll go ahead and launch our second poll. So Joe's going to tell you the story of an application that hadn't been touched in more than 5 years. And unfortunately, this poll got cut off a little bit. So do you currently have solutions in your organization that haven't been touched in more than 5 years? Joe, are you able to share your screen with us?
I am. Do you want me video on or video off?
Either way. We're really enjoying your Apple Music view right now, so.
Come on, Joe, we want to see your nice beard.
Yeah, you do have the beard, a beard of legends today, so.
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out.
So
I thought I was at the right screen, but no, obviously not that one.
we will go ahead and end this poll and check out the results real quick. So David, it looks like the majority of people are about 50-50. So they have applications that are over 5 years old that have never been touched. But a lot of people 26% had these kind of legacy applications all over.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
All right, Joe, take it away.
Hi, everybody. For those that aren't sure, my name up here is Alistair Warner. That's my formal name. Joe's my nickname. That's how everybody knows me, really. I think, as David has already said, application modernization means many different things to many different people. A lot of the talks that you're going to hear today are about the sexy, glamorous end of application modernization. What you're going to hear from me is at the opposite end of the spectrum. It's pretty mundane and not so glamorous, but still very necessary. So I'm going to talk about our experiences working with one specific customer. I think, as you'll come to see, they're starting from a very low base. And so there were lots and lots of opportunity for things that we could modernize. And that's good because that's what we're here to talk about today. Obviously, for those of you that know BP3, then you'll know that our heritage is with the IBM BPM or Lombardi product as it was. And that's really what we're going to be looking at here and now. Okay, let's take the first slide. So we were introduced to a customer who had a solution that was originally built some 8 or 10 years ago. And they were they had a third party that had been maintaining that solution for them. But for various reasons, they wanted to move on, and so became a customer for BP3. The software, say, was written 8 or 10 years, or the solution was developed 8 or 10 years ago, and the software the platform that it runs on really hasn't been modernized in all that time. So most of us were very surprised to find that we're working with a version of software that was as old as it was. We haven't seen it in a long time. And it's also clear that much of the code had not been touched in all that time. Very old. And then, of course, a key constraint for us was a very tight budget constraint. So, unfortunately, we weren't going to be allowed to do maybe all of the things that we wanted to do because we had to work with the customer to stick within, say, their tight budget. So, some of the problems that we came across when we first got our hands on the system were that it had a traditional 3-environment model: development, test, and production. But what became clear to us very quickly was that the test environment didn't work, and clearly been that way for many years. So that was one thing for us to scratch our heads about as we started. The solutions built includes a system of record database, and in there are about 130 tables, 8 gigabytes of data. But the thing that was important to us, that when we looked and compared the database in development and the database in production, no point comparing test because it's not there, there were big differences between the database, and that was obviously an area of concern. Roughly 60 of the 130 tables had a different structure, and there was no real way to tell whether what was in production was correct or whether we should take what was in development as a reference point. What we inferred from that was almost certainly the previous supplier had been doing changes directly in development. So things were not being developed in in development and then being rolled into production. They were just making the changes directly in production. What also became clear was that because the company had been through quite a bit of merger and acquisition activity over recent years, that this solution seemed to have dropped down the back of the sofa. IT seemed to be unaware of its existence. When we asked questions about backups and monitoring, they didn't really seem to know that this solution existed. They barely seemed to know that the servers existed and that they were responsible for maintaining them. So, because the people that we were dealing with were very much business-centric, and that the previous people that they had supporting the solution were engaged by the business, then quite clearly that this is shadow IT. IT didn't know what was there, and the business had been managing it directly. We also found, as you would expect, because the solution had been developed many years ago, that quite a lot of the functionality is now deprecated. Still functional. I'm pleased to say IBM are very good at not breaking existing interfaces, but we needed to modernize the application. And the last point was that the underlying platform is already out of manufacturer support. So quite a lot of issues that we needed to address, and plenty for us to do. The one upside amongst all that doom and gloom, the one upside was that the organization clearly had a very, very strong DevOps culture. It's just that because it was the business that were directly managing their solution, they'd no real way to tap into that. They just saw the DevOps team as a bunch of techies, and they'd no common language really that they could use. And that's really, of all the things maybe that BP3 could bring to this this customer, was the thing that we could really focus on, is helping them to get together between the business and the DevOps team. I'm not going to read out this list because there are really it's a sort of recap on the things that I've already talked about. But there were plenty of things for us to do, and just if I just take 2 or 3 off the top, reinstating the test environment was absolutely fundamental. We needed to put that back into place, and we needed to retrain the business into a culture where we would make changes in development, we would deliver them through to test, they would come into the test environment to test them, and only when we got their approval that those things were actually solving the problem that they raised, will we then push them into production. And to us, this is absolutely vital. It fixes so many problems related to doing software development. It means that in effect, we cut down the number of releases that we make, because we're not fixing bugs that get found in production, because they've been tested and identified earlier in the life cycle. So I say I'm not reading through the list, but you can see there are many, many things there, and quite a big challenge in any case. But so we were working under a tight budget, so doubly difficult. So we went through that list and we tried to break it down into areas of priority, really, just understanding what we need to first. So first of all, we had to understand the BPM platform. It's undergone several revisions since the version that they have, particularly around the UI. So whilst the UI that they've currently got is actually pretty poor, looks old-fashioned, and whilst we could have updated that, the problem that we would have had is that if we'd updated it to the version that they're running today, when we later come to upgrade the platform, we'd have to do all that work all over again to upgrade to the latest UI. So we made the decision that we would defer all work in that space until we get onto a supported platform. Second was realigning the development and prod databases. As developers, that's really important to us to give us more stability in making changes and releasing those changes. The downside is that for the business users, it's difficult for them to understand that as a tangible benefit. At the end of the day, they're only really interested in, does the production environment work? So, excuse me. So clearly that was important, so we decided that we would iterate in terms of fixing the database. We could just about get away with what we started with, and then we would work to improve that situation in the background. And then the third pillar was to implement a DevOps pipeline to include automated testing and automated deployment. Again, a little bit hard for the business users to see the benefits of that. But when we back that up with the new software development process so that we are deploying into a test environment where they can test, then they start to see the benefits. And as we cut down the number of releases and they get more stability in production, that's much easier for them to understand. And so that's where we decided to start. So a little bit about reinstating the test environment. Again, as I said, it's really, as much as anything, it's about implementing a good software development process and retraining the business that they need to come and make comments on what was in the test environment before we would release them to production. It was fairly straightforward. We just took a copy of the production databases to put into the test environment, made sure that the software, the platform itself was functional, and then we were able to bring that online fairly quickly. I think whilst I'm talking about this slide, Debbie wanted to run a quick survey in the background, so maybe he'll post that up. But what did we want to do about modernizing? From a developer point of view, we wanted to get everything under source control. So, whether that was the code itself that the solution was based on, or the configuration around the different environments and automated deployments, automated testing, having everything in source control is absolutely crucial to the way that we want to work. And the second part of that is that, a modern development environment is, the intention is that the developer has all of the tools on their local machine so that they can make changes and test them without having to go to a shared environment and maybe get in the way of other people. So as well as putting all the source code into source control, we wanted to make sure that developers were able to access that locally and make changes and run tests locally as well. As you can see, the customer already had GitLab, which is great. That's what BP3 uses internally as well. Despite that, they were still using Jenkins for their build pipelines, so it's a little bit of a split environment, but that's fine. We can work with that too. And I said the DevOps culture was very strong, so it meant they had good capabilities in terms of container registries, package registries that we could leverage very quickly. They were very well versed in Docker, and so we were able to bring those things online quickly. When we asked about doing data migrations, which we tend to use the Java Flyway library for, they knew all about that, so they were very helpful and able to get us set up on that quickly. Again, when we wanted to use Maven as the build engine, they knew all about Maven. They were able to get us up and running very quickly. So
we'll go ahead and share the results of the poll.
Yeah.
Overwhelming majority of people, of course, are using APIs. I'm actually surprised here that we see a lot of containerization, microservices, people with CICD pipelines, which I know that you're an advocate for, and we've talked before about that. So I like the mix going on.
Yeah, yeah. So as I said, we used Docker extensively, and the way that we did that was we took copies of the development and production databases, which I said were different. A key part of what we wanted to do was make sure that any changes that we made would be effective on both environments until we could get them up to the same thing. So we took copies of the databases for development and production, put them into Docker containers, and then gave the developers access to both of those environments. What that meant was that they could develop a change locally, test it against a Docker copy of development, then test it locally against a Docker copy of production, and so be absolutely sure that that would work in all environments before we even deployed it to the shared development environment, and then promoted it through the test and production. It also meant that we could develop automated tests locally before we needed to deploy those out to shared environments as well. So, sorry, just lost focus. There we go. So our DevOps pipeline in the end looked like this. If you can see that. So the first stage in the pipeline was to deploy all the changes against a Docker copy of the development database, and then run the test to confirm that was okay. Then we went through exactly the same process again, but this time we substituted the development Docker container for the production Docker container and validate all the tests again. So those things are all happening without touching any of the shared environments. And then the final three stages deploy to development, test, and production in turn. And that's proved to be very successful. Again, because the DevOps team to the customer was so strong, then they were able to support us throughout that process, help us to navigate through the various bits of infrastructure that we needed around Docker and Jenkins and registries and whatever other bits and pieces. Of course, something that we were able to do because we had the right vocabulary to talk to them, whereas the business users had no vocabulary in common at all with the DevOps team. So where have we got to? So once we had automated testing in place, yes, we were very quickly able to identify the discrepancies in the table structures and reference data. That was where our initial focus was. And once we understood what those differences were, we were then able to rectify those in an iterative fashion. So we didn't try and fix them all at once at the beginning. As change requests came in from the customer to make changes, then we would try and target the changes that we made to the database schema or indeed the reference data, try and target them to happen at the same time as all the changes that we were making. We still haven't really got to the point of tackling the fact that there's 8 gigabytes of data in this database, much of it dating back many years. That's still a conversation we need to have with the customer, but it's on our list of things to address, and hopefully we'll get there soon. So what are our conclusions? What are our takeaways from this project? I think it is fair to say that much of what we've done up until today has been below the waterline as far as the customer is concerned. Quite a lot of procedural things, quite a lot of infrastructure things, whether that's real systems infrastructure, or whether it's automation infrastructure around a DevOps pipeline. But they have seen the benefits of that, because what they've seen is a much more stable production environment, less change, less rework, and whilst those things never registered highly, they are tangible, and they have seen them. I think they've had more involvement with the process, because we're asking them to get involved in testing ahead of production deployment, and I think that's led to better engagement with the business. There are, now that we've got some of the basic issues resolved, we're now moving on to tackle more advanced things. So we're right in the middle of doing Active Directory integration for them at the minute, and then once that's out of the way, we'll move on and get the platform upgraded to a current version and get them back into support, and then we can start to tackle the bigger things that we deferred earlier on. So addressing the UI and getting them something modern and that looks much better. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening. I think we're time to hand over to the next speaker. So I'll take you back to David.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Really appreciate that. It's exciting to me to see how, as somebody that's been working with IBM BPM and Lombardi TeamWorks before that, gosh, it's been 17 years now, I think. It's exciting to see finally us getting into the point where we're doing CICD across these kind of BPM applications and doing automated testing. These are really challenging early on, but the way that the software tools have developed, and the way we've started thinking about DevOps and being able to apply that to BPM, I think it's just a great improvement for that environment.
I think what was really compelling there is how, and I think Scott Francis pointed it out on the Slack channel, or on the Slack organization for Driven, was that Joe was able to work through the politics and the finances, and pulling those two things together was really key to the success of this project. So good job, Joe and team.
I see we've got Reiner has joined us, and Reiner, I think you can go ahead and share your screen.
Awesome, and please let me know that the presenter view is coming through. Can you see the cover slide?
We got the wrong screen. We see in your
desktop. All right.
There you go.
Might be more fun if we see your notes, though.
Yeah. Let's try this again. Here we go. We'll go old school and just do the desktop. How's that?
There you go. That looks right.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, thanks, David. Thanks, Krista. Joe, great to see you again. So my overview, or my piece of the application modernization section, is really going to focus on some of the fundamentals that we use to help us organize around the opportunities presented by our clients as they look towards application modernization. So we've selected one of our clients with whom we're actively working. We're about 18 months into the relationship. We've built a POC, we've built a pilot, and now we're really starting to scale the program. So I'm going to provide some context around what all that meant, some of the things that we learned, some of the adjustments that we made, and most importantly, some of the best practices or the kind of the core capabilities that we applied in this example. So the areas that I'm going to cover are really the business case. So what is the problem or the opportunity against which we're applying application modernization? I'm going to talk about the concept of business architecture and what it means to organize around the opportunity. We use that information to help us inform a thoughtful technical infrastructure or technical architecture. And then I've got some screenshots and some best practices that we incrementally applied as we were undergoing this journey with the client. So that said, let's get started. So our business situation is that basically our client is a network operator. They have a high volume construction business within the network around which they provide services. So if you can imagine a company that invests over $1.5 billion in building out their network and infrastructure every year, obviously there's some maintenance involved with that as well. But in the call center, in the construction group, we've got an audience of 12,000 users, and they're managing 1 million discrete custom construction jobs. So if you think about going in and doing surveys and getting permits, every one of those 1 million jobs is different, and that's what makes this problem a bit of a hairball. So the client is basically a combination of 6 different companies that merged over the last many years. And so the client has actually already merged a number of their legacy systems onto a common heritage construction platform that serves some of the basics of their need. Where they see opportunity and the things that we've been helping them with over the last 18 months is really establishing visibility, getting a level of control across these 1 million jobs. And now we're starting to apply improvements to help them with performance. As we look towards the future, we're actively working with this client to upgrade and modernize this architecture to more current standards, to a lot of the themes that we talked about already, and I'll talk about more in the discussion today. The kind of the big, hairy, audacious goal for the client is basically to automate everything. In construction, labor is 70% of the cost, and they want to get that labor as efficient as possible. So 1 million jobs, 12,000 users, where do you even begin? So one of the things that we've been using for quite some time, and this is an evolving discipline out of the object management group, there's actually a subcommittee called the Business Architecture Guild, and they advocate for best practices around these themes, is basically setting context for your organization. And some organizations, they do that with operating models. Other organizations do that with value streams. At the end of the day, the assets or the practices are not as critical as just having the concept of having what we call a business process architecture. So having a sense of organization for the business and the processes that deliver value on behalf of that business. Practically, what this looks like for us is that we align those big goals, those basically the operating model, with capabilities. And this is really where business architecture begins. So if we think about capability mapping or value stream mapping, you're not into BPMN diagrams, you're not doing kind of workflow design. You're really just putting together the big building blocks of what it means to understand the core processes that operate your business. We are big proponents of the concept of product management. So basically, when we're applying software to enhance or enable these capabilities, ideally there's a sense of value, there's a business case, there's an understanding of how the business goals tie into the software deliverables that underpin that. And in our theme today around application modernization, when we think about continuous integration, continuous development, and agility, this is a really important theme because ideally with the applications that you're modernizing, if you have active product management, it means that you're continuously improving that software that you're delivering. So one of the other disciplines I'll talk about later in the discussion is that user experience is critical to business architecture because the concepts of understanding your personas and your constituents is key. It's also important to have the concept of a journey map. In the case of this client, it's actually the employee journey that's important because the employee is serving the client, and that's where the customer experience resides. And then beneath this capability map, that's where you then start to organize around what are the processes that you need to start to model out, what are the high value problems to go solve. And in network construction, really what those core capabilities are is that when you're starting a construction job, you've got to run a survey. This is a nationwide company, so there's permits that need to get pulled, and those are varied across the US. In California, they've got an office of a couple hundred people that manage permits. I think in Texas, there's like 3. They get the work assigned to subcontractors that actually go out and do the job. That job needs to be inspected and accepted, and then people need to get paid. When you peel back the layers on these high-level capability elements, there's a lot of process steps, there's a lot of activities, there's a lot of opportunity for improvement to automate. And that's really the vision that we're going after. One of the things that's important that is in place at this client is that they're also a big SAP shop. And what that means is that there are a lot of core processes that SAP is just going to own, and SAP has predefined steps and stages for things like work orders and payment and so forth. And so as we look at the technical situation, it's important to understand, what's custom and what's going to go onto the platform systems that actually run core parts of the business. So ideally, there's a level of equilibrium between those two, and we're in regular discussion with this client about what lives in SAP versus what we're going to externalize through process and help orchestrate or empower SAP even further. That brings us to the next major concept. Once we've organized around the business opportunity and we've got a good business architecture and clarity to our requirements, we know we're dealing with an automation opportunity. In the world of automation, the three core components or the three key kind of descriptors that we use are we automating a task? Are we automating something that needs to get orchestrated or has the concept of flow? Or are we automating decisions? And then the visual below is some perspective of how we look at the world in terms of the technologies or the technical capabilities that are currently in the market that fulfill these requirements. And what's important is that, we've been doing this for 10, 15 years at this point. Some of the componentry below the circles here, that changes over time, but the best practices do not. And ideally, there's an informed decision that's made in terms of whether you're going to put your decision logic within the bounds of the RPA platform, or whether you're going to orchestrate things with workflow, or you're going to externalize things with a decision engine. These are important decisions. So when we look at our example for the client, what we've actually settled on is that our reference architecture is going to be a combination of Camunda for process automation as well as process mining. Back in the olden days, they called that business activity monitoring, and that's more the pattern that we followed because we were more intentful, we were more deliberate about how we hooked Camunda into the infrastructure to really understand what was happening. Tableau is used for in the rear view mirror reporting. So if we think about business intelligence and visibility into construction performance over time and historically, that's where Tableau comes in. We use a combination of Camunda with the Brazos Task Manager for active visibility into the jobs that are in flight. For now, we're not doing anything with machine learning or augmented intelligence, and we're externalizing decisions with Red Hat. It's worth noting that the client at this point wants to drive all automation into their core platforms, and so they've deferred any work with RPA until a future point. There may be some opportunity with RPA to integrate to the websites for the different jurisdictions to which, against which they pull permits and do those types of things. So really, really helpful context here to help us understand here's the type of automation that we're going to do, and then the boxes into which much of the logic that we're building will fit. The other thing that's important is that ideally this automation stack works in complement with the platform decisions that the organization has made. So we know that this is an SAP shop. We know they use Salesforce for client and vendor management. And then there are some custom legacy systems that we need to enhance or work with productively as well. One of the key strategies we're using at this client is that we're actually lifting the processes into Camunda process by process, thereby making this legacy system extinct over time. Because of the sheer volume and users and just the complexity of construction within the four walls of this client, they can't just rip and replace the legacy system. It would be too much risk. So as part of the decision in moving forward into the new architecture, the decision is really that part of the process naturally belongs in SAP. There are elements of the process that will be complemented by Salesforce, but everything's going to get orchestrated by the workflow engine, complemented by decisions being externalized through a decision engine. So summarizing this up before we get into some specifics, We want to make sure we've got effective product management. We've got a clean definition of the business opportunity and the business case. That helps us make an informed and thoughtful decision around what engineering elements we're going to apply. So we're not just building something for, building something's sake. For BP3, that's often led to really good outcomes, and we work hard to maintain the track record that we've got. So let's talk about the solution itself. So as part of, so the first stage that I'm not going to talk about today was really the proof of concept, and that proof of concept was there to prove the enterprise decision for Camunda. It was there to talk about the enterprise decision around Red Hat and prove that out. We also used that to prove that we could do Dockerized containers, that the Kafka engine would work with the solution. We really tested a cross-section of what you see here is the kind of the Lego bag of application modernization opportunities. So in Agile terms, we basically spiked on a number of these concepts, and spiking basically means you pull the high-risk items forward so you can fail fast. Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Because it gets really expensive when you find that out later in the project. So these were, the items highlighted in red are ultimately what were going to underpin the pilot. And what we did in the pilot was we said, you know what, we're going to do this in a minimally invasive way. So the proof of concept proved the technology, but we said, let's validate the proof points by incorporating a process layer, or basically by putting Camunda workflow across the legacy systems just to establish visibility. So yesterday, Andrew talked about BPMN diagrams, and that's what you're seeing here. That's ultimately what we built in Camunda that then hooked intentionally into the back-end systems of the client. And then we used our Brazos Task Manager, which is the view on the bottom left, to in a very unfiltered way, just to surface visibility to the tasks and the buckets in which the work resided. And then we created just a really basic milestone view, which is here in the middle, that basically shows across hundreds of thousands of work orders in what bucket is the work. We found a really high value business opportunity in that visibility. And I think this is a big part of why process mining is getting as much traction as it is in the market, is we saw that 20% of all work orders were in kind of a paused or on hold status, and the client pulled together a SWAT team to go clean up the loose ends. So basically there was a bunch of work that was maintenance work or things that people never got to, but there was no Tableau reporting, there was no visibility to highlight that. And man, did we light that up when we applied the end-to-end process to all the activity that was in the system. So not only did the client get visibility, but they were able to apply a level of control and performance even in this initial stage as well. So as part of then the next stage, we've identified a greenfield process, which in this case is permitting. So none of the legacy systems really handled the permitting function end to end in a clean way. And so I've got some screenshots around that, but that's actually going to be going live in the next couple of months, from which we will then go after the end-to-end process and really automate that as well. Permitting is really well suited to process orchestration because it's really complicated. It needs control points. You need consistent measurement. Across all the jurisdictions in the United States, everybody's got a bit of a different permitting flow. So it was a really great opportunity to add value. So as part of engaging in the pilot and going forward into this end-to-end system, we also then took that opportunity to bring in our user experience team. And it's not to be understated the value of design in terms of really staying true to the high-level goals of the solution. So these are actually the client goals. And in the first slide, I talked about automate everything possible. But when you peel it back, some themes that really speak to the power of workflow or process engines are that you don't want users to become experts in the system. Have the system guide the users, have the system through the flow, automate the work, the handoffs, the control points, etc. Don't make the users have to work for the system. Ideally, you've got a task list where at any given point, the work that you need to do now is actually there waiting for you. It's pushing work through. And ideally, the documentation, training guides, ideally that's embedded in the screen so that the user doesn't really need to think. Basically, you're turning construction in a network organization like this, you're turning it into booking an airline ticket. It's clicking through, you're getting guidance, the system's prompting you to fill things in. It's really the value proposition of process orchestration at its core. So for us, when we talk about what we did in design is there were user interviews that were conducted, we did journey mapping, we did a bunch of prototyping and testing. The end-to-end flow was wireframed, and basically we used these techniques and these best practices, and Andy's going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. We use these concepts to basically take the portal view, which was the stock Brazos task manager that you see in the back with the multiple shades of blue, to really clean that up into a more robust task management experience, which is what you see here in the middle. And one of the things that's pretty significant in this view is in the top corner where it says my jobs, my permits, my tasks. This is really the true power of workflow automation, is that you've got embedded layers of process and activity and business lenses through which you're looking at this information that you can then expose through the task manager. So if somebody in the call center just needs to see what are the tasks that I need to do, they go to the task view. If they want to take a step back and get a 36,000 foot view of everything that's in flight, they look at their jobs. What are the construction jobs end to end for which they're responsible? And then they can drill down into permits as well. So what's really powerful here is you've got multiple layers of visibility into the work, and that is super important when you're managing through 1 million work elements, and that's just construction jobs. So 1 million construction jobs multiplies out to 10 to 20x that in terms of tasks, in terms of permitting sub-elements. There's a lot going on here. One of the things that we also did, or the design team did, was they used the opportunity to clean up some of the views of the data screens where people enter data, make file attachments, things like that. So I wanted to provide some context into what that looks like here as well. So last point before I kind of sum this up. So we found once we applied the visibility project, so we did the pilot and we displayed the end-to-end visibility, we realized that the way the tasks were assigned and the way service levels are enforced, so tasks that are overdue or not overdue, is actually highly sophisticated at this client because of the different regions, because of the different construction job types that need to be enforced. And so that was a fantastic, actually both of these were fantastic candidates for externalization of this logic via rules. And what's really important here is that these rules can be administered by folks at the client without having to re-promote code when they change. They can be tweaked on the fly and applied. They can be validated in a QA environment. It really speaks to the power of modular design and making sure that you're not burying your business logic into the guts of the solution. This is something that we've seen across a number of our clients, is the more that they're able to externalize business logic, the more flexible, the less brittle, the less, hey, I'm going to fix one thing and break 10 others. You get a lot less of that. And so we really love this, this design principle. So summing it up, I talked about the POC where we took the high risk items and made sure that we were clear of any risk there. We then did a pilot where we gained end-to-end visibility to the business opportunity that then helped inform the roadmap of what were the high value problems, what were the good opportunities for us to go after. We are now in the middle of our program delivery where we've really started to ramp up, set up parallelization of tasks. This client would like to be self-sufficient or have a level of internal capability around the solution as well. So we're doing what we call co-development with our team and their team. And then ultimately, as we release this solution in a CICD paradigm, we will then have a group of folks actually in a sustaining mode, maintaining this application over time as some of the underpinning systems get changed, like SAP, like Salesforce. So it's not often, it's important not to overlook the fact that sustaining is a really important thing to budget for and to plan for. So yeah, so that's kind of the overview and our intention here, and I'm being intentionally ambiguous about the client because when we're live next year, we will have them speak both here and at one of the vendor conferences, and we're looking forward to that. I really didn't want to steal their thunder, so they'll come out with their story next year, and we're looking forward to that. So thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Reiner. That was great. You know, this was one of the projects when I was talking with our team that's actively working on it, where they pointed out that when we introduced the BPMN and DMN diagrams, it really improved the conversations with the business. And it helped them understand, helped the business understand, you know, what was really happening in the code. And I think it was a big contrast for what they were used to in their legacy application, where really all they had a view into was the data. They didn't really understand that process. And I see that Gordon has joined us. Hi, Gordon.
Hello.
Great. Looks like your audio is working. And Gordon is here, and he's going to give us a live demo of the Brazos Task Manager or Brazos portal. You saw in some of Reiner's slides an example of where this is being used. And the kind of comments that we've gotten from this customer in the way that Brazos Task Manager has improved the visibility in their process, it's just huge for them. You know, before having this kind of tool to show them where their process was and kind of the state of the different jobs that they're working through, that was totally invisible for them. And so there's a lot of value that gets added with this BP3 software that we've developed over many years now and continue to add to and learn from and get new features into. So Gordon, with that, I will pass it over to you. And
well, actually, David, before Gordon starts, why don't we quickly launch a poll? So Reiner mentioned it. They were dealing with multiple work queues. Pulling them all in one place was part of why Brazos Task Manager was brought in. Just to get a feel for the audience before Gordon starts down this path, how are people currently dealing with varying work queues? So are you going to different systems, or are they all coming to a single work queue? Or have you built a homegrown solution? So give people a couple seconds to get that set. All right, we'll go ahead and end this poll. So it looks like people are coming through various access points to do their work. So about 30% of people have a single work queue, and we've got a small 5% out there with the homegrown solution. So Gordon, I think you got a good team or a good audience here.
Great. So David asked me to give a demo of Brazos Task Manager, also known as Brazos Portal. So I want to give you a brief history of what this tool is and why we built it. So as most of you know, we've been building workflow and process solutions here at BP3 for basically our entire existence. And one question we constantly get, regardless of the platform our users are logging in with, is that they would like to customize the way that their users view their tasks or their work list. So, you know, with any BPM type solution or workflow solution, every user who's part of the process needs a place to log in and see what's assigned to them. And so pretty much every tool has something for that. But oftentimes those solutions are either too basic, or they've got many different features, but they're confusing or unintuitive, or for whatever reason, the client we're working with may not find it to be suitable for their own end users. The nice thing about most of these process platforms is they do have APIs, which means that you can access that task list and that work in a programmatic way, and then display it to your own users however you want. But the reality is building a new portal or a new task management solution like this is quite a bit of work on the front end. And it also requires a bit of maintenance as the underlying solution continues to update over time. So at BP3, what we did, since we were getting the same requests so many times, was we actually used those APIs to build our own portal, which can be placed on top of basically any task solution. We currently support 2 different BPM applications right now, but there's no reason we could not expand that in the future. So this is BP3's re-envisioning of how users might want to view their work. So what I'm looking at right now is an example of someone at an insurance company looking at their inbox, or again, it could be called an inbox, a work list, task list, anything like that. And so this is where I can log in to see my work. I've got 44 tasks either assigned to me or assigned to a team that I'm a member of. And as a user, I've actually categorized those into different work boxes to help me understand where everything is and kind of organize my work on a daily basis. So I've decided that my high priority tasks that happen to be insurance claims should be here at the top in this red group. So I've kind of filtered things that way. I've got other insurance claims right here. And down below, I've got tasks from my client onboarding process that I'm involved with. So I've got different types of work in my inbox. And as an end user, I can actually modify the way this is all set up. So I can actually drag and drop my groups around if I want to. And I can also change the way these groups are defined in the first place. So if I just click on the gear button, for example, this group, like I said, is for high priority insurance claims. I've defined that using 2 filters. Process name has to be insurance claim, obviously. Priority of the task has to be high. So pretty straightforward there. The cool thing though is that at this point, I can also customize the columns that show up here in my task list. So I'm showing the name of the task, instance ID, but then I'm showing some specific data that's related to the claims themselves. So I've got claim type, client state of residence. Here I've got claim billing price. And if I expand that, you can actually see one of the new features we've added recently is you can highlight values above a certain number, or if it's a string that matches a certain string or contains a certain string. So in this case, you'll see any claim that's above $500 will be highlighted in red in my task list here. So just take a quick look. You can see those numbers are highlighted there. The other thing is we can now show more than 6 columns down here. That's another slight improvement we made. So you can go well over 6 columns, and we've done some work to make sure that the responsiveness of the screen is ideal. And of course, all of this is still supported on mobile. So this is all responsive and swipe and tap friendly. So if you're opening this on your phone, you can access all the same data that you could normally. A couple other quick things here. If I click the info button, I can see additional business data about my task pretty readily here. The other thing I can do is if we choose to give this access to the end user, they can see a diagram of the process that they're currently inside. So it gives them some context to the work that they're doing and allows them to understand how their work affects other people downstream in the process. Okay, so that's kind of the standard Brazos portal pitch here. You can do some other things like customize these views and share them across different teams. But what I really want to show here while we have your attention is that our team has done a lot of work in the past year or so to add a whole new view option when you're creating these views. So I'm going to click on a different view here at the top. So that was kind of my standard task list there. We have a whole new function here that allows people who are more on the process owner side or the management side to view all of the data for ongoing or in-flight tasks or process instances, you might call them. So the idea here is that instead of being limited to the tasks that are assigned to me or assigned to my team that I'm directly involved with, I can look at this from a higher level. And you might actually think of this as more of a dashboard view, actually. And so typically when we're building these types of dashboards, there's been some development effort required. So you would need someone from BP3 or someone from your team to go into the design view of your process workflow platform, and actually design a screen, set up SQL statements to pull the right data out of your database, and configure everything properly so that you can see the data you want. This new feature here in our portal or task manager is allowing you to do all of that on the fly. So these dashboards or these instance views here can be configured by end users on the fly if you give them that permission. So what we're seeing right now is, in the previous view, one of the types of tasks I was looking at was client onboarding. So if we want to kind of zoom out here and look at this more from a management view, here are all of my client onboarding requests that are currently in flight. So I can view the instance IDs, all the same kind of column data that we were showing in the previous view. But in this case, again, these are all of those instances that are currently active. So if anyone were to call me up on the phone or email me and ask me the status of one of these open requests, I can simply look in here and I can search for a last name, for example, to quickly find the work that I'm looking for. I could also filter things by region, for example. So I can look at just the requests that are from the South and from Mississippi, for example. I could also clear those filters and I can search by or filter by HMO or PPO, in this case for these claims. So you can set up all these different types of filters. Again, either your administrator or your end user can set all of this up. And it allows me to get really quick and easy visibility into all the open work I have. If I click on one of these, I can see all the same details that I showed before. So you've got your business data, got your process diagram, so that's pretty familiar. One other feature that we've added here is you can add a link. So in this case, this link can link to any other system you want, or it could link to the instance details page that you've already set up in your workflow platform. That piece of data that the link is created on can be used as a parameter inside your URL to send you to the exact right place there. So just some kind of new bells and whistles we've added. There's a variation on this instance view that I want to show now. So this is similar, but we call this the hierarchy view. And so in this case, we're thinking of things more from a top-down hierarchy click-through perspective. So looking at the same data here, but in this case, everything's broken down by region at the top here. So I can click on, let's go with Midwest here. And then within that, I can click on one of the states that's in the Midwest. So I'll click on Iowa. And if I look at those tasks, I'm now back to the same view we had before, but we've kind of been able to drill down from the top level. And again, I can click on these to view that same data that we looked at earlier. Finally, if I go back to the highest level here, we also have a milestone view here, which allows us to see where the work that is currently in flight currently sits within the context of the process. So you can see in the review phase, that's where most of our work is at the moment. And within that, 9 of those tasks are in the review client onboarding request step. The other 2 are in background check. And you can also see that 4 of those 9 in the review step are overdue, which puts us above our threshold for turning this milestone red. And again, all of this is configurable by an end user. You don't need anyone to be a programmer of any type to do this stuff, and you don't need to redeploy your application or even get into your designer view to build a view like this. So anyway, just to review here, we have basically reconfigured the entry point for the end users of a BPM platform to allow you to completely configure that interface for the optimal use case and kind of day in the life for the end user. Every user can have their own inbox that's organized their own way. And now your people who are more in management or process owner side can build their own dashboards and instance views on the fly as well. Everything that you build here, if you think it might be useful to someone else on your team, you can actually share that view with other people as well. So there's a lot of reuse possibility here for your team to help you, again, become more efficient as you work through these task lists and these processes. So I think that's everything I have. So I'll pass it back to David and Krista.
Thanks a lot, Gordon. Always appreciate a live demo during a conference like this. Knock on wood, everything went well. So it's.
I was actually really afraid there for a few minutes, so I'm glad you made it and your sound worked. So our next panelist is joining right now, and that is going to be Aaron Bretz. So Aaron's going to talk us through microservices, but before Aaron talks us through microservices, I've got another handy dandy poll, of course. And it is, are you using microservices in your business today? So let's level set and see where people are. Also, don't forget you can ask questions to the panelists live in the Q&A. I'm actually responding to an answer. Also, if you have questions, really tough questions, throw them over in the Slack channel. People are jumping on those questions and having good conversations over there. We've even had some people reach out for some application support. They had questions, and our support team jumped right on that. So if you have questions, just go ahead and put them over in that Slack organization. Again, that link is in the top of the chat. So we'll go ahead and end this poll, and I think you have a mixed bag here, Aaron. So 29% said yes, they're using microservices all over their business today. 33% said no, not at all. And about 38% said they have some, but not much. So I think you're talking to the right audience.
All right, thanks, Krista. So today we'll just give a kind of a brief overview of what microservice architecture is and maybe how to think about it. This is definitely meant to be a little bit more of a primer on how to move the needle within your organization to get away from some of these monolithic applications. So you can see the name here of the talk is moving past monolithic applications with microservice architecture. So brief agenda, I'm just going to lay out a problem scenario, a potential solution, that being microservices architecture. Then I'll jump into kind of a real world example that BP3 engages with. And then I'll just briefly summarize and hand it back to Krista and our MC, David Bailey. All right, so let's imagine that you have a business application that needs to be brought into the modern computing world. Demand for the system is outpacing throughput, right? So kind of as Reiner alluded to, you have people working for the system. It takes real, system experts to keep the system moving and production in line. The costs are increasing, whether that's through development, maintenance, or operation. From an accounting standpoint, things year over year just keep piling up, and meanwhile, throughput is also decreasing. So maybe it's time to look at a better way to achieve that business problem. Now, the result of this monolithic application is probably born out of some of the fact that 10, 15, 20 years ago, hardware and operating systems were chosen for the 80% of core functionality for your business application. But there's still that 20% of your business application that wasn't really thought of or really addressed when choosing the hardware and the operating system and all the middleware components that are required for your business application. And those kind of end up being the dark corners that I think we are all familiar with, where it's just a sliver of the application functionality, but from a development and maintenance standpoint, it really consumes an outsized portion of time and effort. And so I named this slide "The Solution," but really it's just a solution, because I think we all know that there's many different ways to solve a problem. But if we bring ourselves forward into the modern computing era, we now have cloud computing, and really we can think of this not just as the place where our photos get stored, so we never lose them, but really it's infinite computing power. And infinite computation means that we can have unlimited machines, and specifically virtual machines. So this is really the concept that allows for microservice architecture, is cloud computing, because ultimately microservice architecture is loosely coupled services that are built on independent virtual machines that are networked together. So this allows you, so by using microservice architecture, this is going to allow you to build an application that can evolve over time. And maybe you have, one piece of an application that does one piece of work. And as that technology evolves and goes through the normal life cycle, maybe that particular technology that was chosen 10 years ago isn't so applicable today, and there's a better solution. And so the idea is, in a microservice architecture environment, you'd be able to easily swap out that piece of functionality as it kind of operates as a black box. So moving with that idea, there to me is a pretty clear analogy when it comes to microservices, and that is that microservice architecture does for software building what Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts did for manufacturing, right? In the case of Eli Whitney's interchangeable parts, there's physical products that are being built by predetermined identical hardware components and focusing on the practical application of that product. So you can see here I have a little everyone's favorite IKEA diagram, and IKEA is able to maintain thousands of products using just a few dozen pieces of hardware to hold it all together, and that's not really that exciting anymore. But I think if we move forward into the cloud computing world, we can take this analogy just a step further and say, well, now we can build software products using predetermined identical middleware components and focus on the digital application. So if I blow out my slide here over on the or picture on the right, we can imagine some cloud environment, and let's say we're building a customer service application. We can segment our application into 3 different components, which we'll think of as microservices. So you'll have a database that will keep the customer records. You'll have a service that will manage the customer interaction. So let's say I'm a customer service agent, and I want to see everything that's happened, or everything that the customer has been involved in from an interaction standpoint. They called 2 weeks ago about problem X. They called 4 weeks ago about problem Y. You would have a microservice that would allow you to basically pull all the interactions that happen based on the particular customer that's calling in. And then likewise, you would also have a microservice for customer requests. So they're calling today. We want to see that they had an interaction both 2 weeks ago and 4 weeks ago, but now we need to create another request for them. And so you can kind of see I've very simplistically drawn out what these services might look like from a architecture standpoint. And my slide got a little screwed up here, but there's supposed to be a legend at the top left, and the orange lines represent interchangeable middleware. And meanwhile, the black lines represent the custom code that's the actual business application that your company would maintain. So things from the OS all the way down to the actual databases can all be specified in a repeatable fashion, and then that kind of just leaves your application code that needs to be maintained by developers. So you might hear this term, infrastructure as code, and this gets to this reusable hardware / middleware component of cloud computing, where we can have human readable files that basically define the runtime environment. So really, this isn't all that interesting, but what this file really represents is a runtime environment. And because it's written like software, that means that we can maintain it like software. And so that means it can follow all of the same development processes that make really good development teams run efficiently. We can do the same thing for provisioning hardware and middleware and different components so that a mature organization, a development group should be able to quickly spin up an environment to try to tackle a business problem without having to go through the the processes before provisioning hardware and installing operating systems and getting the environment to a state such that you can actually start thinking about how are you going to actually solve the business problem a little bit differently by working with this concept of infrastructure as code, right? Having environments that are already predefined with static files that are all maintained using a development, a standard development process. That gives a lot stricter control over what the environments can and will look like, but also gives the great benefit of being able to get stuff done a lot faster.
So Aaron, you make a really interesting point there. It's like you can, as a business person, when I come to you with a problem, instead of you having to think about what's the right infrastructure, what's the right, how am I going to spin this up? How many different people do I have to contact in my ops center? You already have it ready to go, press a button, and then you can get to solving the business problems without really thinking about that up front and maybe coming to that later, making you move a lot faster. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So, you say you come to me on Monday and say, hey, I need a level of estimate on, what it's going to cost to have this feature. We're going to need a new database to track this. In the old world, it's okay, give me 3 months and let me get an environment that IT approves of. In this type of environment, it's like, okay, I'll let you know by Friday what I think is possible. So I think it's really about achieving, scale much faster and being able to get to the application code that matters. Whereas, the stuff that basically sets up the application environment, all that is abstracted away.
Yeah, being someone who does come to you on a Monday and says, I need it by Friday, I really appreciate that.
I've also seen this sort of architecture really improving the ability to troubleshoot something in the applications as well, right? So the developers can spin up something that resembles production in their local environment and do troubleshooting and really see what's happening there. So it's a great progress in software engineering.
So now we'll look at a real world example that BP3 works within. So Keller Williams, the world's largest real estate brokerage, engages BP3 to build their Smart Plans microservice, which is part of a larger whole that is their web-based real estate CRM platform. And Smart Plans are simply user configurable workflows. So the user being a real estate agent, and much of this was covered yesterday, so I'll try not to repeat too much. But effectively, these workflows are basically, packaged touch points for an agent to talk to a contact, whether it's on the buy side or the sell side, having these managed workflows to send text messages, send emails, just engage with contacts on a regular basis, which is a huge part of the real estate sales world. Being able to manage how they interact with their contacts is really big for their agents. So you can see through this screenshot, this is a pretty modern looking web app, and on the left here we have a bunch of different modules, and the one that we're looking at is the Smart Plans module, which effectively is a service that is probably composed of a bunch of microservices, is probably the best way to think about it. Let's see, what's this next slide, right? So these configurable workflows ultimately translate into Camunda workflows on the back end. And that is what Keller Williams and BP3 work together to develop and maintain. There's, again, some different pieces that connect the actual CRM app to the Camunda workflow engine. But at a high level, one smart plan equals one Camunda workflow instance. And again, there's a bunch of supporting pieces that all make that work, and that's kind of loosely drawn out here. So we have the user interface. A user can create a smart plan to work with their contact in a managed way. And then there's a messaging bus or a data feed that allows all the different microservices within Keller Williams, not just smart plans, to listen for different events that happen within the web-based CRM. And so in the case of our smart plan service, we have a controller service that's just monitoring that messaging bus. And when something happens that we care about, we tell the Camunda process engine that we need to start a smart plan, and then that creates some entries into the database. And again, this is a pretty simplistic view, but at a high level, I think that suffices kind of the basic, at least, components of how a smart plan is ultimately operating. But again, to the user, it just looks like a web app, right? The user has no idea that, it takes 14 REST calls in order to get a smart plan running. It just works. And let's see, what's the next slide? So in the future, if, let's say, Camunda were to fork their code base and had a way better process engine, 10 years from now, let's just pretend, changing out the Camunda process engine, in theory, should really be like a black box. We have inputs that go into the Camunda process engine, and we have things that come out of it. And what happens in between, we don't really always care about, right? So in that way, that's kind of how we can think about microservices as interchangeable components within the broader context of software development. Now, I've glossed over a lot there, but we'll just go with it. And so this is a screenshot here of the Google Cloud Platform environment within Keller. Not a ton interesting here, other than I just kind of wanted to show that, back to this idea of infinite computing, you can see that for their one cluster that runs all 200 and some microservices within their entire company's infrastructure, there's 136 virtual CPUs and over 1,000 gigabytes of memory, right? So that's a very large computer. So having that infinite computing power really opens the door for microservices. I don't think it would be very advantageous to try to create a microservice architecture using all on-prem hardware and software. Okay, so we'll just round out with the benefits of microservice architecture. This allows them to isolate code changes and deployments. Development teams are distributed across services. So as mentioned, the Smart Plan service is both BP3 and Keller Williams. But likewise, there's a whole team dedicated to the UI. There's a whole team dedicated to the contact service. And we're able to operate in isolation pretty effectively. I mean, it's not like, we, the Smart Plans team, don't necessarily contact the contacts service. However, there's a lot of overhead that happens above us to make sure that all the teams are working in order. So it's not like we're isolated and that's all just abstracted away. There's definitely a lot of good work that's done to make everything stay in sync. But at least from a development standpoint, we're able to focus on what our strengths are. And we integrate using different web protocols, and we're able to consume and invoke other services. And then that allows us to delegate our operating system and our environment and all of our middleware components for whatever is best suited for our services existence and purpose in life, right? So in the case of smart plans, we use Camunda and everything that Camunda requires to create our service. But if you wanted to do an IBM BPM microservice, that in theory would be possible as well. So having enterprise level opinions of what these runtime environments should be, as well as the rapid deployment, makes provisioning the hardware and just the whole ramp up time to development much, much faster. So lastly, think about microservice architecture. If you're in a monolithic application environment and you know that you've got to basically boil the ocean to get off of this application, by using microservices, you can kind of think about carving off different chunks of functionality and placing those into their own microservice. And over time, it will develop this paradigm of infrastructure as code. And that kind of gives rise to this idea that your IT operation can be a series of interchangeable parts, each service being its own black box that can be upgraded as technologies evolve. And then distribute that development across functional areas of expertise. So just like Keller Williams, you can hire BP3 to manage and develop your process automation bits, and hire out the work for other critical components with very specialized vendors who are experts in a particular field. And that's all that I have.
Thanks a lot, Aaron. I really like how that ties back to the discussion that we had with Jeremy Warren yesterday.
Yeah, and if you missed any day of Driven, the various recordings will be available late this week, early next week. So before we hit Tracy hires, I know Tracy is a proponent of agile methodologies, and one of the things he's going to talk about in this presentation is using agile methodologies. And so just to get a level set before he starts off is, do you use agile methodologies today in your organization? I think that a lot of people will say yes to this, and Tracy, being an agile expert, will go in and say maybe not, but I know he's had some experience training people and teaching people agile methodologies. So
welcome, Tracy. And as we're getting these poll results in, if you want to go ahead and share your screen. Tracy's our last presentation for the day, last but not least.
So we'll go ahead and share these poll results. So it looks like a majority of people here are using agile methodology, 72%. Some people are not using it at all, but some people are using agile in some places, or a combination of agile practices. So Tracy, take it away.
Tracy, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Like that Sprint commercial.
Thanks, Krista and David. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about a client we had that was a large leisure cruise line, and a process by which they went through to modernize their reservation platform. So this particular cruise line has 33 different ships. They run itineraries ranging in length from, on the small end, 3 days. They do have some sailings that go a full year, 360 days. The ships sail, the 33 ships sail under 3 separate brands. These brands were acquired through a series of mergers. The last one was completed about 5 years ago. And like often happens in mergers, they left the company with lots of different systems. In this case, 3 different go-to-market strategies supported by 3 different platforms. 2 platforms were their what they call land-based systems that they use to sell reservations to people before embarking on a cruise, and then a third system that was shared by all 3 companies that was used to sell things once guests were on board. This could be future cruises. This could be shore excursions. If you've ever taken a cruise, you know that there's a lot of selling that happens once a voyage departs. But what they had, because of these 3 different systems, there was a challenge sharing systems or information across the systems, especially between the 2 land-based systems and the onboard system. But there were also problems sharing customer data between the systems as well. Each of the 3 systems was a monolith. Aaron just talked a lot about monoliths and some of the problems you get with monoliths. They had heavy client UIs communicating with back-end servers. And all 3 systems were vendor locked. And the problem in this case with the vendor locked systems is that sometimes the company was forced to adjust their business operations to the way their systems worked. And this is just because in the short term, it was too difficult to adjust the software to their business. Often, all 3 of their vendors were happy to accept feature requests for changes in the way that the business wanted to operate their business, but in some of the cases, it was a very long timeline to get those features. In fact, one of their vendors had a backlog of 2 years worth of features that they'd requested, and that's how long it was going to take to get all the features they needed. And in this industry and many others, by the time they get those features, they're probably going to be doing something different anyway. Just not flexible enough to respond to the changes that they were making. So the IT organization took a look at what else was available in the market as they wanted to consolidate these 3 systems into one, as well as have a flexible system, and there just wasn't anything. So they decided to build a custom solution. So they started with a very small team, sort of a hotshot team that was just trying to decide what is the feasibility of producing a system. They're looking at meeting these goals. The first thing, and probably the thing that we heard over and over again as we worked with them, is they wanted a world-class user experience for every single person that interacted with this system. These are internal users that manage pricing and inventory for their system, the call center agents that book for people, travel agency partners, and for the guests who were able to self-serve through their web platform. They wanted a consistent experience across all those different channels. And they wanted the same experience for people who were using the land-based version as well as the ship-based version of their reservation platform. They needed a system that was flexible enough to quickly react to changes in the company's business model and selling strategy. They wanted to reduce customer reliance on call centers, allow them to manage their own vacations, and they wanted to improve visibility to customer spend while the customers were on board the ships, whether that be customers that buy jewelry, art, spend in casinos, souvenirs. They wanted to understand which customers were doing what on board the ship, and they just didn't have that visibility. So the first thing they did was just they decided to pick platforms. They engaged BP3 early on. They realized that their solution was going to have some process and AI components. They found BP3 and asked us to help them with a software selection. Of chief concern for their entire platform was they wanted to go open source as much as possible. They really, really didn't like the vendor lock that they were trapped within, and they wanted to use open source tools. They'd settled before they brought us in on building microservices written in Scala, deployable to multiple cloud environments. Remember, we have, they have data centers on their ships as well as data centers spread throughout the US. And they wanted whatever process and decision automation platform they chose to run in a JVM, because Scala runs in a JVM. They wanted open source, but they wanted good vendor support behind that open source, and they wanted products that were able to respond quickly to their changes in their business model. Given these criteria, we quickly narrowed the field to a few different open source platforms and settled on Red Hat's Process Automation Manager. Process Automation Manager has a widely used process engine. It has a really good rules-based inferencing platform. And at the time, and I think still today, it was the only open source product that had a level 3 compliant DMN engine and DMN modeler. The company was already a Red Hat customer. They had existing support for other tools, including OpenShift, which is Red Hat's supported version of Kubernetes, which they had chosen as a deployment environment. So for a lot of reasons, it made sense to use PAM. Once we selected a product, they decided, and this is common, to carve out a piece of functionality which would exercise various pieces of the platform they'd chosen, and build a proof of concept. So we were engaged for 3 months to help with that effort, and we worked in tandem with their IT development organization, and we focused really on 2 pieces of that POC, while their IT organization did a few other things. So I'll focus on the things that we did with them. First thing we did was we went in right at the beginning of this POC and led a design sprint. Now, if you're not familiar with what a design sprint is, what we at BP3 do is we come in and we do a 1-week workshop, and we frame system requirements and user interactions. We usually produce a prototype out of that gets tested with users. In this case, we produce high fidelity UI designs out of this, which then this organization's IT department built. But really out of this workshop, what you get is a clear definition of what you're going for. In this case, we chose to focus on the interactions that pricing analysts have with the system. Where pricing analysts manage cruise pricing and they manage inventory, and their goal is to maximize revenue for the company. So we did the design sprint. We produced a set of user stories. We produced a set of designs, and we sort of narrowed the scope of the POC into something that was consumable. And then we also built, on the PAM stack, we built a cruise pricing engine. Now, that was using the rule-based inferencing engine, the Drools platform within PAM. And this particular engine was combining information about a particular guest, their cabin selection on a particular cruise, along with what amenities, excursions, and transfers they wanted to package together, applying the appropriate discounts, and computed a price that was unique to that guest. This was part of the decision architecture that we were going for. So in just a few months, with their IT department, we built a working proof of concept, and it really is what sold the project to the C-suite. They were able to get about a $20 million budget, and then we immediately wanted to get going and build a product. So out of that POC, we had settled on an approach to requirements analysis and design, and we also made some broad architecture decision. So remember that we had a goal that we have a world-class user experience for all stakeholders. And what UX-focused design did for this is it really, at least at the POC, enabled the capture of requirements in such a way that the system could be built around this tenet of world-class user design. Design sprints and other UX-focused workshop enabled us to build user personas, define business goals, produce UI mockups, and otherwise frame the features of the new system in a way that articulated value to one or more of the stakeholders. These workshops are also effective at breaking the system into parts that can be articulated and understood by business stakeholders and developers alike. It's actually a really great way to do requirement analysis, and we'll get into that a little bit more. But the POC also allowed us to demonstrate capability to build a microservices-based event source system that could be replicated across their 3 land-based data centers and the 33 moving data centers that were scattered across the 7 seas. 1 data center on each ship. Now, I haven't talked about this up till now, but a unique challenge of this project was our system needed to be replicated across these ships. And as a ship is sailing, it often gets into places where it gets out of contact with the rest of the world. And that unreliable connectivity can create problems. So because we were on an asynchronous message-based platform for an architecture, the advantage there is that messages can be replicated to all these data centers. But if a data center is uncontactable, is that a word, uncontactable? I'm not sure. But if you can't get to one, you can queue those messages up, and as soon as they get back online, you know, if they're sailing around Antarctica or something like that, you can begin to push messages to them. They can process them, and they can then get back in sync with the rest of the world. This eventual consistency is really important in a system like this, where you have so much replication that needs to happen and somewhat unreliable communication. So we had a POC, we'd sold our project to the executive team, and what's next? The director's been given this giant budget. He's about to begin the most ambitious project he's ever run, and his development organization has never done anything at this scale. But he's under pressure to show progress early. He decided a good place to start would be to take that POC and actually get it into production. He already had something that looked like it worked. But as you know, as most of you know, POCs aren't really production code. We do a lot of things. We take shortcuts sometimes. In this case, the whole thing ran on a laptop. It wasn't in the cloud. It wasn't hooked up to a back-end system of record. Now, in order to get this POC into production, we had to hook that up to the legacy systems database. And again, we have an event-based, event-sourced architecture instead of a traditional relational database architecture. It ended up being a really big lift, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but there were lots of challenges around that, which we'll cover in a minute. As really the IT organization was working on that, BP3 came in and worked in 3 different areas. We worked in AI, we worked in process discovery, and we worked in requirements discovery with our design team. And really, in the AI space, we made improvements to the pricing engine that we had built as part of the POC, adding extra functionality that we had excluded. These extra functionality were really around promotions and discounts. We also undertook the creation of a second decision service, which was cabin availability. In order to sell reservations, you need to know the price, but you also need to know what's available on a ship for a particular itinerary. So we had these engines. We need to figure out how to integrate them well into the rest of the system. So we worked with architecture on patterns around deploying these decision services as microservices within their architecture. We built patterns for APIs and also for testing these both in isolation and within the system. So while we were doing that, we had other people working on process discovery. We helped with their air and ground transportation systems. When you buy a cruise, if you've never done it, you often will bundle a flight to and from your embarkation port. This is a third-party provider that provides that. You may pay the cruise line, but it might be United or Delta or Southwest who actually provides that air transportation. Likewise, ground transfers from the airport to the cruise port. They have processes around how they make flights and ground transportation available. So we did some process discovery around that, as well as general exception management when things go wrong for the pricing analysts. Now, we did process discovery. We slated the actual implementation of those processes for a second release. And again, this is, you heard Reiner talk a little bit about it. You heard Aaron talk about iterative work and subsequent releases. We did the process discovery as part of this first release, slotting the implementation of those processes for later. The last thing we did is we came in and we participated in their requirements discovery process. Now at the POC, we used a design sprint to frame those requirements for the POC. And this organization liked what we did, and they invited us to be part of their product owner's process or requirements discovery for the system. But they really wanted their product owners to drive that process. In this case, their product owners were brand new people, not quite ready to do requirements discovery, and they kind of stumbled out of the gate a bit. They didn't ask us to lead that effort initially, and they did have a few issues. Took a little bit of time to recover. They asked us to come in and help drive. Our design team did an excellent job of kind of taking that ball and running and beginning to mentor them in the art of requirements discovery through design thinking. It did get better. It just took a little while. So I kind of mentioned some of the challenges, but again, we had a big budget. It was a big project. I don't know how many of you listening have run projects this big. $20 million always seems like a lot of money, but if you're not careful, you can quickly spend that money without getting anything to show for it. So let's just talk about some of the challenges you might run into on a project this big. These were challenges that we actually faced. We were able to get through everything that I'm going to show you on this list. Some of them were bigger than others, but let's just look. So the first thing you'll see is on the top of this list, the organization we were working with here, every time they'd ever undertaken a project, they used sort of a waterfall approach. This was the first project that they tried to do using agile methods. They were just inexperienced. Took this company about 6 months to really hit a groove where they could start to achieve the goals that they set for themselves in sprints. And frankly, I've seen this a few times. This was not the first time I've seen an organization moving to Agile and not getting it right away. So really a good solution if you if you're new to Agile, is keep your development team small. You might have a $20 million budget, all right? You might be looking, this is a 1 to 2 year project, and I need 40 people on 4 different teams to deliver this. Don't go hire 40 people, or don't put 40 people on the project. Keep your team small, give them measurable, achievable goals, and wait till they start achieving those goals before you scale. That's really a good solution to that issue. Here we were dealing with lots of new technology. I don't know how many of you have used event-sourced architecture. It's fairly new. It's been around a little while. Deployment in Kubernetes has been around a few years, but what I'm seeing is enterprises only in the last 1 or 2 years are actually starting to use Kubernetes for deployment. Dealing with new technology always presents risk and challenge. My solution to this is don't bite off a ton. This is kind of like the last point. Start small, pick something small. Even the POC that we picked to put into production was probably a little bit too big in as a single one release. Because of these 2 challenges, things got delayed. Business stakeholders started to become impatient. We saw, promises were made. In a month we're going to have something. In a month became 6 weeks, became 2 months, became 3 months. With progress was being made, it just was being made behind the scenes, and in this case, the development team had overpromised. So as business stakeholders became impatient, started to lose a little confidence, we kind of had to reset. We went back and we went back to our design thinking, our UX goals, and we started to deliver really front-end UIs that were built on the back-end system. It's amazing how much buy-in you can get from business by giving business something that they can touch and feel and play with. Even if all you've done is put a new skin on an old goat, you still have something that excites users. Once you start to do that, you can sort of swap out the back end and then, just give a little bit of candy with each release that is really the big back end stuff that you're swapping out. The last thing that we saw was that testing was a big beast on this system. Now, Aaron kind of walked you through what it looks like to build a microservices-based solution. Microservices are great. I love them for all the reasons that Aaron mentioned. But one of the things that can happen, especially, you have to take a little bit extra debt right at the front end, because all these disparate systems that act as black boxes have to integrate to each other. That initial integration can be challenging. So get QA involved early in your testing plan. Don't confuse QA with user acceptance. At this place, we had our user group, their QA plan was just have the users do the QA. That doesn't work. Get a good testing strategy. Let's review really quickly our project goals, and I see I'm already 5 minutes over. I see Krista kind of smiling like, is he going to get done? And now I'm taking a long time talking about that.
I don't know why you're saying that would be me smiling like that. David was smiling like that.
Overview of our goals. Again, how do we do? This is where I remind you about COVID. We're getting ready to drop a release early in 2020, and as you may remember, the cruise line was one of the first industries to really get hit. Right now, in America at least, cruises are still not sailing. None of them are. In the near term, it looks like they may start shortly. And we know when they do, customers are going to return. People love their cruises. I know lots of people that do these things more than once a year. But right now, there's a lot of risk associated with that activity. When they begin sailing, we know the market's going to be different. We're not sure how, but we do think that this system that we've built will help this particular cruise line to compete well. And we really are looking forward to seeing how it works once they get to start using it. So that's it from me. Krista or David, back to you.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. Really appreciate it. We are running a couple minutes over. Apologize for that, but I want to thank all of the panelists that we've had today. I really enjoy hearing about actual projects that we've delivered, and so that's how we've kind of tried to structure today. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I guess one thing to kind of wrap things up, I do want to note that application modernization, it's just one of the ways that BP3 thinks about the work that the software engineering team does. So we're also building new modern applications from scratch. And we think of that as full stack development, and we're always bringing a process lens with it. So, you know, whether you have a legacy application or a process that needs updating or something brand new, BP3 is here to help.
Yeah, David. So just to remind everyone, we'll be back here tomorrow for enterprise user experience. It's been called out throughout the entire week. So a really important day. You can check out the chat for the link to the t-shirts. So info.bp-3.com/t-shirt for your free Driven 2020 t-shirt. And then don't forget, we're continuing these conversations over on our Slack organization. That's going to be at the top of the chat. Check out the Slack organization and make sure to ask your questions there. Our support team, our engineers, they're all on there answering questions. So thanks, David, for hosting today. And thank you all for coming to Driven 2020.
Thanks, Krista.